Welcome to Jury Charge and Literary Practice. Let's get started with this jury charge. Ready? However, in any case based on circumstantial evidence, if the circumstantial evidence is susceptible of two reasonable interpretations, one of which points to the defendant's guilt and the other interpretation to his or her innocence, you must adopt that interpretation which points to the defendant's innocence and reject that interpretation which points to the defendant's guilt. If one interpretation appears reasonable and the other interpretation appears unreasonable, you must accept the reasonable interpretation and reject the unreasonable. Murder is the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. Malice means either an expressed intent to kill or an intent to commit an act dangerous to human life without knowledge of the danger to and with conscious disregard for human life. Aforethought means the malice must precede the act. First-degree murder occurs when the killing is committed with malice aforethought and a deliberate and premeditated intent to kill. Deliberate means determined after careful thought and weighing of the consequences. Premeditated means considered beforehand. The law does not try to measure in units of time the length of time during which the thought must be pondered before it can ripen into an intent to kill that is truly deliberate and premeditated. The time will vary with different individuals and different circumstances. The true test is not the duration of time, but the extent of the reflection. A cold, calculated decision may be arrived at in a short time, but a mere unconsidered, rash impulse will not amount to deliberation and premeditation, even though it includes an intent to kill. If you are not satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder, he may be found guilty of any lesser offense, such as second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, or involuntary manslaughter, if the evidence is sufficient to establish his guilt of such lesser offense beyond a reasonable doubt. Second-degree murder occurs when the killing is with malice aforethought, but without deliberation and premeditation. Voluntary manslaughter is the intention killing of a human being without malice aforethought. An intentional killing is said to be without malice aforethought and therefore reduced to voluntary manslaughter in the following circumstances: where the killing is committed during a sudden quarrel or heat of passion, and where the provocation is such that it would naturally arouse such passions, and where the killer acts under the smart of that heat of passion. The heat of passion that will reduce a murder to manslaughter must be such as naturally would be aroused in the mind of an ordinary reasonable person in the same circumstances. Okay, some of the words in here that you might want to practice: manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter, reasonable doubt, malice aforethought, interpretation. We had interpretation in there, I think, a few times. Unreasonable, deliberate, all right. How about we'll do a little bit of literary practice now. Something maybe a little bit lighter. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. I received a letter from a parent who wrote, "Mr. Rogers, how do you do it? I wish I were like you. I want to be patient and quiet and even tempered and always speak respectfully to my children, but that just isn't my personality. I often lose my patience and even scream at my children. I want to change from an impatient person to a patient person, from an angry person into a gentle one. Just as it takes time for children to understand what real love is, it takes time for parents to understand that being always patient, quiet, even-tempered, and respectful isn't necessarily what good parents are. In fact, parents help children by expressing a wide range of feelings, including appropriate anger. All children need to see that the adults in their lives can feel anger and not hurt themselves or anyone else when they feel that way. to some jury charge practice. Ready? The jurors voted as reasonable people. They made a decision based upon the evidence that they had at the time. The jury must return a verdict of not guilty unless they can find enough tangible evidence to prove that the defendant had committed the crime with which he had been charged. The defendant must be set free if the state's case is not strong. The state has the burden of proving the evidence. In this case, the state had the best evidence. Later, it was determined that the state had evidence that it did not share with the defense. The state is not able to do that. The state must share the evidence that it has. In this charge to the jury, the judge told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that they were going to be led into a room where they would stay until they decided the fate of the defendant in this case. At the time that they felt that they were ready with their decision, they were to let the judge know. They were to feel safe in their decision. All right, let's try this literary material. Ready? One summer, midway through school, I was on a weekend vacation in a little town in New England. I decided on Sunday to go hear a visiting preacher in the little town's chapel. I heard the worst sermon I could ever have imagined. I sat in the pew thinking, he's going against every rule they're teaching us about preaching. What a waste of time. That's what I thought until the very end of the sermon, when I happened to see the person beside me with tears in her eyes, whispering, He said exactly what I needed to hear. It was then that I knew something very important had happened in that service. The woman beside me had come in need. Somehow the words of that poorly crafted sermon had been translated into a message that spoke to her heart. On the other hand, I had come in judgment, and I heard nothing but the faults. It was a long time before I realized it, but that sermon's effect on the person beside me turned out to be one of the great lessons of my life. Thanks to that preacher and listener in need, I now know that the space between a person doing his or her best to deliver a message of good news and the needy listener is holy ground. Recognizing that seems to have allowed me to forgive myself for being the accuser that day. In fact, that New England Sunday experience has fueled my desire to be a better advocate, a better neighbor, wherever I am. That literary was actually out of a book I have. It's called The World According to Mr. Rogers. So just some nice little short stories in here. Let's see here. What else do we have? Maybe have one more nice little story. All right, let's try this one. Nice and short. Ready? One of the mysteries is that as unlike as we are, one human being from another, we also share much in common. Our lives begin the same way, by birth. The love and interdependence of parents and children is universal, and so are the many difficulties parents and children have in becoming separate from one another. As we grow, we laugh and cry at many of the same things and fear many of the same things. At the end, all we leave the same way, by death. Yet no two threads, no two lives in that vast tapestry of existence have ever been or ever will be the same. So we have tapestry. That's a word you may not hear too often. Tapestry. Interdependence. Threads. Alrighty, well that will complete our literary and jury charge practice. Thank you.